Hey everybody, Captain B-Nard here with your BHDL1 Week 6 recap and Week 7 preview. Again, going to assume everyone watching this also watched the weekly battle, and yeah, we're just going to go ahead and jump right into it. Our game this week was against a Praetor slash Adam. He is a strong competitive battler, seasoned draft league participant, and PokeTuber as well. Going into this match, we were sitting at a 4-1 record, whereas my opponent was sitting at a 3-2 record. And so, unfortunately, we did end up losing this game 3-0. It was a very competitive, very fast-paced, very high-octane game, and yeah, that is pretty much all I have to say about that. We're gonna get into more of the details here as we go ahead and throw it over to the team preview screen. Here you can see the 6 Pokemon he brought to battle on the right-hand side, 6 Pokemon I brought on the left-hand side. And so, as you can see, he brought the Cleaver, the Landorus Incarnate, the Urshifu Single Strike, the Poltegeist, the Abomasnow, and the Titan. As I mentioned during the battle, there actually weren't really any surprises for me here, due to the fact that though he has a number of viable options and brings this week, I was actually kind of expecting him to bring the Snow Core on his team, just due to the fact that he made a last-minute Terra Captain change and made Titan one of his Terra Captains. So that kind of led me to believe that he was really planning on bringing the Snow Core. Indeed, he did bring the Snow Core. Looking at my team for the game, that was Gastrodon, Hawlucha, Gudra, Pincurchin, Espathra, and Orthworm. The only one notable exception here from Pokemon I usually bring to battle is the Iron Moth. I didn't end up bringing the Iron Moth this week just because I actually felt like Espathra had a better matchup against his team than Iron Moth, and I wasn't 100% sure he was going to bring the snow, although I had a strong suspicion he would. But granted that, I thought Espathra, if I could set it up, would actually have the opportunity to really wreak havoc on his team because I believe he does not have any steel types on his draft, and the only dark type he had was the Urshifu, which is X4 weak to Fairy, actually. So I kind of thought that Espathra actually had a really good matchup this week, although, as we'll see in a minute here, unfortunately, I didn't really get to do anything with it. But yeah, that was just kind of the logic behind why I brought what I brought this week. Yeah, having said that, we're going to keep on rolling here, and we're going to throw it over to the weekly pros and cons. As you can see here, we only have one pro this week, since we did lose the game. 3 cons this week, so we're going to go over them. So, the only real pro of the week here is that I thought I played the game okay. I only say okay, not great, because I feel like there were some plays that I could have done better in hindsight that I didn't do. But I did make a few plays that I was actually pretty proud of this game. Probably the biggest example of that is early on in the game, we had a situation where I had Gudra in against my opponent's Landorus incarnate form. And so, obviously, Gudra can have water or ice moves coverage for that. He decides to go ahead and make the switch directly into the Abomasnow to get the snow up, and also to absorb. If I did go for a water or ice move, but I did predict he would go into the Abomasnow there, and I go for the Fire Blast instead, connect with it, and one-shot the Abomasnow. So that was a pretty nice read on my side, and it did definitely set me in a pretty decent position. Although, unfortunately, obviously, he still was able to get the snow up, which did end up hurting me later on in the game. But other moves that I made that I thought were pretty good was the Terra Fairy on the Orthworm. So I was able to use that to kind of catch him off guard a little bit, and go ahead and take out the Urshifu single strike with a Terra Blast Fairy. So I was actually pretty happy about that at the time. Although I'm only half happy about that in retrospect because one of the things that I think ended up costing me this game was the fact that I didn't have Earthworm around for the late game to try and deal with the potential Titan mini sweep, which is kind of how the game ended up, unfortunately. Um, so I kind of should have tried to conserve, I think, my Earthworm a little better, similarly as the way I was trying to conserve the Gudra to deal with the Landorus. I should have tried to conserve the Earthworm to deal with the Titan more, but unfortunately, I just did not play it that way. I felt like I kind of had to use the Earthworm to get rid of the Urshifu. That was kind of the difficult thing, as we'll get into in the cons here. So, but yeah, overall, I did think I played the game okay, and like I said, some of this stuff is just hindsight. But um, now we're going to go ahead and move into the cons. So, obviously, the biggest con of the week here is we did lose the game 3-0. So, while that's not like a super terrible loss numbers wise, it is still a loss, and that does hurt us as far as trying to get playoffs, which is what our ultimate goal here is. So, obviously, that is a big con, the big con of the week, I should say. Other cons of the match include I thought that this was actually a pretty difficult match on paper for us, and looking at the Pokemon he drafted versus the Pokemon that I drafted, I really thought that our team did not match up very well against his team, as he does have a lot of high point value threats that just match up really well against our team, specifically like the Landorus and the Urshifu. Also, the Snow Core is definitely a problem for my team since we don't have any way to erase weather. Um, so yeah, I just didn't think it was a great matchup for us on paper, which kind of leads me to the last con of the week, and that's that I feel like my prep for this game was definitely lacking. So I did spend a fair amount of time trying to prep for this game, but the difficulty with trying to prep for this guy's team is he just has so many potential setup sweepers on his draft that it felt like it was almost impossible to account for all of them with whatever sets that I brought to battle. So um, I was trying to do the best I could to account for every potential situation. And unfortunately, as I mentioned with the mini Titan sweep at the end of the game, I didn't have enough resources left to try and prevent that from happening. But yeah, it just seemed like a really daunting task. Although in hindsight, I feel like I could have prepped better for this game. I could have maybe brought a couple of different Pokemon that I didn't bring that maybe would have countered the snow better. Although again, even though I had a strong suspicion he was going to bring the snow core, it wasn't a guarantee, obviously, because he had to not bring stuff like the Ursaluna, which is obviously a premier high point value threat. Which he had to leave off the team. So I wasn't 100% sure what he was going to bring, obviously. So yeah, that just kind of led us to not having the best prep this week, I don't think. There were definitely some things that I feel like I would do differently in hindsight if I had to run this back, or even not just in hindsight, but also not knowing what I know now. I feel like maybe I could have done a couple things differently that would have prepped my team a little bit better for avoiding an outcome like that. But yeah, at the same time, it just kind of was what it was. I think we'll definitely have to try and buckle down and maybe even devote more time to prep in the coming weeks in the league, um, which actually is going to feed us into something new here that I haven't done thus far in the league yet, which is now that we've talked about this week's game, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the current standings in our league post week 6. So right here is a full list of all 16 participants in the league right now and our current standings and records. So um, as you can see, following this loss, the Philadelphia Pidgeys are technically sitting in 7th place with a 4-2 record. We're actually involved in a 6-way tie with 5 other coaches that also have 4-2 records, although many of them have higher differentials than us, which is why they are technically ranked above us. So, this is going to kind of be my synopsis of where the league is at this point. Post week 6, as you do know, it is a 9 week regular season, so we have 3 more weeks of league to play before we cut to playoffs, with kind of a caveat, with a twist that I don't believe I had mentioned before. So, record wise, I feel like our league kind of breaks down into 3 separate categories at this point. So, the first category is going to be the cream of the crop, the top records in the league, and I would put positions 1 and 2 in this boat, obviously, as the only two. Seeing as how they're the only teams that one have a 6-0 undefeated record and one has a 5-1 record. So those are obviously teams that are in a league of their own at this point as far as records go. They have relatively high differentials. They have 0-1 losses, obviously. So those teams are in great positions to get into playoffs, as long as, barring some massive happening. I think the team that is 6-0 is actually mathematically guaranteed to make playoffs at this point. So no questions asked, which is good for them. And then the team that is sitting at 5-1, I believe, even if they were to lose out at this point, they would still either make playoffs outright, or they would be involved in the conversation for playoffs, as I will kind of get into in a second here. How this is going to break down for those of you who might not know. So that's kind of the first dividing line in the records. Like I said, is the top two. Then the next dividing line I would actually draw um, down the way after the number 10 spot. So, as you might notice, looking at these numbers, there are actually 2 teams that have not played their Week 6 games yet, and they are both currently sitting at 2-3 records toward the top of the bottom there in the numbers 10 and 11 positions. However, for the purposes of my analysis right now, that's not really going to matter, just because obviously when those teams do battle, I believe they have an extension because one of them is currently out of town. But when they do battle, obviously one of them has to win, one of them has to lose. Therefore, whoever wins that game is going to go up to a 3-3 record, and whoever loses that game is going to go down to a 2-4 record, since they both currently have the same records, obviously. So the second dividing line I'm going to draw here is going to be the 8 players, 6 of which have the 4-2 records, which are obviously one of which is going to be me, and then plus the other 2 players that are going to have 3-3 records. So that's going to be positions 3 through 10. So that is the kind of like the middle of the pack, essentially. Players that have either more wins than losses, or are breaking even currently. And all of those players are in a relatively strong position to make a playoff appearance here, myself included. Although, as you can see, we are toward the lower end of the tiebreakers here for the 4-2 records, and that actually could play in to whether or not we make playoffs, which again I will explain in a second here. Um, yeah, those are all those records, and then the final grouping of participants, I would say, in this league are going to be positions 11 through 16. As you can see, whoever loses that outstanding game here will have a 2-4 record, and they will join the 5 coaches that are currently sitting at 1-5 records at kind of the bottom of the list here. So the reason that I say that this could be interesting is just because this league has a little bit of an extra twist, an extra round that no other league that I've participated in until this point has. And what they do is, rather than having the top 8 players get guaranteed spots in the playoffs and then start the playoffs, basically what they're doing is they have the top 6 players getting guaranteed spots in the playoffs, and then the players that end up in positions 7, 8, 9, and 10 are actually going to have to play each other to get those final 2 playoff spots. So I believe it's going to be the player in position 7 is going to play the player in position 10, and then the player in position 8 has to play the player in position 9. I believe that's how that's going to work out. Um, because as we know in playoffs, normally it's whoever's in the number 1 spot plays 8, and then 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, and 4 versus 5. Um, So I would imagine this extra round that's being inserted is going to have those same rules. Now, this could potentially come into play for us here, because this is kind of the boat that the Philadelphia Pidgeys are in here, sitting at a, again, 4-2 record, but on the lower end of the 4-2s tiebreaker wise. So we have 3 games left in the season, obviously. So kind of the way the math is going to break down, as I see it, having taken a look into the future of our games and everything, is this. So if we win all 3 of our last 3 matches, we will definitely be in the top 6. We will definitely get a guaranteed playoff spot, no questions asked. Now, if we win 2 of those matches and lose one of them, I think it's going to be statistically about 50-50 at this point as to whether or not we either get a guaranteed playoff spot, or whether we fall in one of those 7 through 10 numbers that we have to actually fight an extra round for our playoff spot. But just depending on how everyone else does and what our tiebreakers end up as, that is kind of the bracket that we'll fall into, I believe. Now, if we only win one of these 3 games and we lose 2 of them, I think we're still guaranteed to be on the lower end of that extra round bracket. So I think we're still pretty much guaranteed to at least have a chance to fight for a playoff spot in that extra round. And if we end up losing all 3 of these last games, then we actually, there's a chance that we might not be involved in the conversation. I think that might actually be a 50-50 as well, based on tiebreakers, if we're going to be involved in that extra round to determine the last 2 playoff spots or not. So, despite our loss this week, we are actually still in a pretty relatively good spot to make a playoffs run here, although I don't want to jinx myself, obviously, knock on wood. But yeah, those are going to kind of be how the numbers shake out going into the last few weeks. Now, the extra round thing, I just have to briefly note, I'm really not a fan of this idea, and reason being is because in a situation like this, especially with how spread a lot of the records are in this particular season of this particular league, I could easily see a situation where players, specifically the player in the number 7 spot, perhaps even the player in the number 8 spot, may have the same records as the players in the numbers 6, 5, even 4 spots in the league, and yet they may actually have to defend their spots in playoffs despite having the exact same records as people who don't have to defend their playoff spots, which I think would not be a fair situation. But we'll just kind of have to see how that plays out. Similarly speaking, I will say that I'm hoping that I can win enough games and have a good enough tiebreaker that I am just not involved in that extra round at all. Because if I land in either the 7 or 8 position, as I currently am actually, and I have to basically defend my playoff spot against another player that has a worse season record than me and end up losing it, that would suck quite a bit. But similarly speaking, if I end up doing poorly the last few weeks and I wind up in the 9 or 10 position, I actually wouldn't feel too good about taking a playoff spot away from someone else in the 7 or 8 position that has a better record than me. So at this point, I'm just really hoping to not even be a part of that conversation, not be a factor in that equation at all, and just hoping that I can do good enough to avoid that. But we'll just kind of have to see what happens. This is a thing that's, like I said, this was a rule that was implemented in this league. I guess it was an oversight by me when I was reading the league rules that I didn't know about. But this has been in place since the start of the league, and will be the way that they determine those last 2 playoff spots. So, like I said, hopefully I'm just not a part of that equation, because I don't really like the idea. I don't think it's exactly fair. Um, but we'll just have to kind of see where that goes and what happens with that. And hopefully we can rebound from our loss this week, kind of refocus, and try to get a big win next week. And with all of that being said, that is going to bring us to our next week's game. And our opponent for that is going to be the notorious HIM. You can see the name is cut off there because it's a little too long, um, but yeah, here's a snapshot of his draft league team right here on the screen. So, as you can see, he has quite a few high point value threats at his disposal here, specifically the Bax Caliber, the Tornadus Therian form, and the Lucario and the Volcarona. Those are the ones that stick out to me. He also has some pretty strong value pickups too, like the Quagsire, Gardevoir, um, Jolteon, even the low kicks, the Gyarados, obviously, can't forget about that. Um, so yeah, this definitely looks to be another very strong, well put together draft league team, and yeah, it's definitely going to be another tough week for us. But like I said, at this point, I'm just really hoping to kind of refocus and get back on track here with a win this week to try and push for that spot in the playoffs. But yeah, I think that'll pretty much do it for this one. So that's it. Thanks for watching again, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, and/or subscribe if you did enjoy, and stay tuned for more new videos in the future. So that's it, and we'll see you next time.